This is an introduction to this idea of something called learning teams. And we have a fair bit of time, I think. So I put together a package of information to take us through, but I'm mostly interested in a couple of things. Asking any questions, like take yourself off mute and just ask questions. If it's something coming up, I'll let you know. But otherwise, I really want to be sure that I'm able to answer what questions you guys have specifically. And the other thing too is to stay in touch afterwards. So if there's something that we don't have time for on the call or a specific extra bit of information, I'd be happy to provide that offline or get you in touch with people who know if I don't know or whatever that is. So good evening, thank you. This is a logical follow-up to the session we did last time. I think we did a general introduction to these new views and what they are and what they're not, and how they kind of fit with contemporary views as an evolution. And so this topic is a really excellent and logical follow-up to that. And that's actually the first thing I want to talk about before dissecting the learning team model of organizational learning in a little bit more depth. For those of you who don't know me, I started as a first aider in the 1991-92, and then that began a 20-year conventional career up until 2012, and was a member of the CSSE a couple of times for long periods of time in that 20 years. Was one of the first CHSC class, and really, had a great career and all that. But between 2010 and 2012, I actually departed. I kind of ended what I call my conventional safety career on February 29th, right in between the two sawmill tragedies in British Columbia in 2012. And so since that time, I've been eagerly exploring and trying to learn and understand all of these new ideas that were coming down. What was new was really just how they were coming down to industrial. I've always been involved in industrial type operations, construction, or that sort of thing. But these ideas were coming down from academic study in other parallel fields and major accidents. So that's really what's been going on since 2012. And that's really brought us to today. And the work I do pretty much exclusively now is help organizations come to understand some of these principles and apply these principles in their organization, and figure out what works and what doesn't for them, and what the best package is for them going forward. So that's what I do. And learning teams are a huge part of this journey. So I just wanted to say, it's really important for me to caution, because a lot of people read the book or learn about this learning team method, and they want to jump into this method. And I'm a stickler for going for what we call philosophy first. That I think that this tool is really just group investigation unless it's really preceded by an understanding of the basic philosophical tenets that kind of get us here in the new view. And without that, I think it's really challenged for you to have the experience with learning teams that other organizations are. And that philosophical shift really is new terms and definitions, as we touched on last time. It's adding to our current definition of safety, which is simply the, preventing bad outcomes is fine, and it's gotten us this far in 100 years. But we've been very successful at preventing bad outcomes. We now need to expand our definition. And so the creation of good outcomes is every bit as logical and effective a strategy for safe operations in 2020 as simply guarding against bad outcomes has been for the last century. And so when we add that definition, expand the definition, there's some different terminology and things like that. So I think I want to put that caution right up front that these are a fun tool and they yield incredible results for organizations. But there is work that has to be done first to unlock that potential. Otherwise, it's just a new flavor of the week in safety. So we've been throwing around this term blotto for the last couple of weeks or a month. So we're kind of riffing off Eric Holnagel's efficiency thoroughness trade-off, the book he published, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, about ETO, the efficiency thoroughness trade-off. And we've started to have this question. There was a podcast episode, Dave Provan's podcast episode, where him and Drew Ray really dug into this. And it was at the request of a client, actually, who is going down the learning team process, the New View journey. And so they point to a couple of papers that are, one is called, I can send you all this to you, but one is called a review of literature. It's individual blame versus organizational function. That paper really, and there's another one called Antecedents and Consequences of Organizational Silence. So you got all that? I'll send it to you in the notes. But what these papers are saying, like peripheral to the direct safety kind of target is they talk about voice or silence. They talk about a psychologically safe culture where people have voice and there's ways to use that voice. And on the other end, they talk about silence, more of a silent, or going so far as concealment culture is a term that has been used against both Boeing and DuPont in the last few years. So that it's an unintended consequence, I think, of what people believe is really effective management. But if you manage safety with the old definition, then low numbers in green dashboards just mean everything's great and nobody really inquires further. And so when we expand the definition and we realize that the quietness we sense is just because we've slowly made it clear over the years that we can't handle the truth and we're not interested in learning, that we're interested in blame. So these papers do a lot to paint that picture outside of safety, that when we use blame or retribution in safety, we're entitled to. I think I said on the last call, employers in Canada have the right to discipline for safety, but this notion that we have the obligation to is a matter of some debate. And it goes down to a discussion of what's really going to manifest as due diligence for you. So these papers all talk about the consequence of blame, and that works against learning. And organizations have the right to land anywhere on that scale they want to be. But I think the important thing to recognize, that's foundationally important to recognize, that blame comes at the expense of learning to some degree. And it's really about looking at the incident and choosing very wisely there. I think these papers do a great job, but that's something that really needs to be talked about. So typically too, before an organization follows the learning team model, we'll have some what we call fundamentals workshops. We spend a lot of time with already safe organizations. We spend a lot of time talking about errors and mistakes. That is unintended things that could be better, really. A lot of time talking about blame and accountability. We hear that term accountability all the time, and the definition has really migrated towards more like culpability or some kind of holding people to account is really punishing people. And so the real definition of the word accountability has migrated to be a reactionary thing. And when we talk about accountability, it just very simply means giving one's account the ability to not just articulate one's account, but for it to be safe to articulate one's account. And the other aspect of accountability is sort of joint. I'm responsible for you, you're responsible for me, we're responsible, we're accountable to one another, we're responsible to one another. And so pulling that term back to that side of the fence. A lot of discussion about causation, because part of this kind of evolution that organizations are having in safety is that they take on board a more complex notion of how accidents are caused, moving away from domino models or fishbone models or something like that. We do spend a lot of time talking about critical risk and controls, because at the end of the day, that's what we're really focused on. And we talk about those in some slightly like non-auditing kind of ways. But critical risk and the presence and effectiveness of critical controls, and have we identified our critical risks? Can we, as management, identify every critical risk in complex operations? Or do we need to engage with the workforce a different way so that they are alert to critical risk all day, every day? They're not participants in our system, it's their system. And so that's really something we talk about, how we tap into the workforce to be alerted to critical risks that might be off our radar. All of this has to do with approachability. All of this has to do with those directing minds of the organization, I think, being approachable. And then complex systems. We don't do well by overly simplifying what work looks like. And we have to embrace complexity, not so that the answers that come from us after that will be complex, but I think as safety professionals or safety managers, if we can get our heads around these notions of complexity and recognize them where they exist, it changes our toolkit somewhat. And we realize it's no longer a complicated machine that we're tinkering with, but in complex systems, it's more like an ecosystem. It's more like something that can be nudged and influenced and nurtured, but it's not just a machine. So these are just high-level bullets of what we have to unpack in these fundamental workshops, I think, really to make this tool work the way it works. Here's a key piece. I'll go quickly through this because you're probably all real familiar with Conklin's black line, blue line. But in Conklin's black line, blue line model, what he says is that the black line represents the plan or the safe work procedure or the schedule or the budget or the work instruction or whatever. And in this, the blue line represents work as it's actually done. The first part, let me get my fancy Zoom laser pointer. Ta-da! So this first bit up here, this is what we would call variation. It's just variation a little bit plus or minus that intended plan. This tail we might call drift. We might refer to consistent sort of progress away from a known norm or standard as drift. So variation and drift. And what this model really unpacks when we workshop this in organizations think they know everything that goes on out there. And one of the early homework assignments is managers go out and they learn things that actually take place out there that they did not know. And that's really the first hurdle, is organizations realizing that what goes on in the shop floor or what goes on the site when it's not a big management walk around or an audit is a different set of things. It's just a different set of things. It's not malicious, it's not stupid, it's not evil, it's not lazy. The only response I have to people who say, well, that's sassy, I won't say it. The only response I have to people who say you can't fix stupid is that's the people who say that comment might apply to them. So we have a lot to learn about the reality of work. And what we've done through otherwise really effective safety management is somehow insulate or alienate ourselves so that when we come out to do an audit and we've got that work instruction, that black line work instruction in our hand, we're auditing to that standard. And they know to show us what's on that paper. They all know to come into alignment, and that blue line gets real tight to the black line for a period of time. We know this. We show the workforce that there's only a couple of good answers, and that's safety first, boss, and we're following every rule and we're following the procedure to a T. And in many organizations, if the workforce really truly does follow every rule to a T, that's a work to rule situation that crippled the London bus system, didn't it? Wasn't that the beginnings of work to rule? Was the bus drivers couldn't strike, I think, but they just decided to follow every single rule there was, and it effectively crippled the system. Same on longshore, wherever it is. So there is variation, and variation itself is not the enemy, as we would have been led to believe for years. In fact, where the blue line goes above black, these might be real successful stories. They could conceivably be where innovation happens. So what we have to be concerned about is not the gap from black to blue, but in fact, blue to red. And we know why we establish black lines. They're a standard. We don't know exactly where red is, so we draw a line in the sand that's arbitrarily sufficiently far away from the red line. But it's really important that we daylight all these lines, and that in modern organizations, we have to have a frank conversation about all of these lines on this graph, because it's only through that. So now, somebody, safety advisors might go out and audit work going on with the work instruction in hand and look at both sides of it. Might look at compliance with that work instruction, but look at variation from the work instruction and seek to understand the reasons and the pros and the cons of that variation. And perhaps it's an opportunity to update that work instruction because something innovative or novel is happening there that can be made safe. Shop-built tools is a great example of something that a strict black line view of the world would think is the enemy, and yet shop-built tools are an amazingly innovative thing. So it's really how you see your job. If you see your job as about compliance and about just preventing the bad thing, then yeah, shop-built tools are bad. But if you see your job as facilitating good outcomes, that is the evolved definition of safety, shop-built tools can be engineered and made safe, and they could be award-winning. So variation itself is not the enemy. It also contains human ingenuity and innovation and all kinds of amazing things. It is the influences on this line that we need to come to understand. And it's exactly those influences that we will not be shown or allowed to learn about if we are a blame heavy organization. And I don't think this is in here, but and we just did a call a couple of weeks ago. So if this is a little bit repetitive with the last call, I'm sorry. But some of the questions we ask going into an organization are the percentage of recent investigations that have causation, that land on a causation that's a counterfactual. So it's a good question for any organization. How many of your last 10 investigations, the cause was something that didn't happen? Worker didn't follow procedure, worker didn't use PPE, rule wasn't followed. These are counterfactuals in that you're saying something didn't happen, and that's why the accident happens. But that is different than explaining indeed why it happened. So we're having to sort of look beyond that counterfactual. So one good test assessment is the number of recent investigations that conclude with a counterfactual causation. And the second is the number of recent investigations that trigger some kind of blame or retribution or warning or something like that, that's a deterrent. And so those are a couple of good test sort of assessments to do to find out where an organization's at. But it's all about this black line, blue line thing. We're very safe. Yeah.
Can I just throw something in there as well that I find that kind of, this is all new to me, black line, blue line, but I fully understand the influence and the importance. But something else that kind of factors in there that I've always encouraged my clients to consider is, again, going back to the wellness concept, when you're doing your incident investigations, how many of those underlying factors, contributing factors, are wellness related? Fatigue, somebody didn't speak up because they didn't feel engaged with the workplace. They felt that they were, if you're a First Nations gender uncertain employee, what are the likelihoods that you're going to put your head above the parapet to talk about anything? So the information we're gathering in investigations or metrics or KPIs is only as good as the engagement, the diversity, the wellness of the workplace. And that all comes back to that investigation piece. What are you investigating for, and what are you investigating against? What's your benchmark? If you widen the parameters, you really do start to see more influential aspects as to what's influencing the safety in the workplace. So just another variation on that theme, but that again, for me, that wellness piece.
So a couple of things: investigation versus learning, which I think I'm going to touch on. That this is a learning model that can be used after something that we wish didn't happen, but this is not an investigation technique as such. And I completely agree with intersectionality and all those other factors that you list there. My sensitivity is really how safety weaponizes these things into tools of blame. So, the Safe Start program is an excellent program and can be used quite generatively, I think, proactively, by helping people focus and be mindful and those sorts of things. But it's too easy to use the terms you've learned after the fact to say, well, you didn't have eyes on task, you didn't have mind on task, you were in the line of fire. So the very same concepts that can be used to create good can easily flip, because we've got a century of doing it this way. And so, we just gravitate back to using those terminologies after the fact. And that's really that safety 1, safety 2 thing. Great thoughts. Hang in there, because I think I got some I got some stuff for you coming up. But cool to jump in. See what Scott did there? He just had a thought and he just jumped in with it, and that was awesome. So anybody else?
May I then ask, what does the red line represent?
Hazard. Risk.
Understood.
Yeah. Yes, should have said that, sorry. Yeah. We know that the workforce and people close to the field are really masters, or the real quote is, workers are the masters of complex adaptation, is what they're doing. They're adapting to the circumstances. But we've never supported good, wise, transparent adaptation. We've forced these adaptations to become secret and something that's kept from us. And that's an unintended consequence of otherwise award-winning, audit-passing safety management. So Conklin's principles, that's another part of the foundation's workshopping. I mean, there's a lot that can be said about that. For error is normal, we talk about the hospital study that was done by Decker, where when we only investigate negative outcomes, the things we find we believe are causative, we believe those things aren't present in positive outcomes. But if we go and investigate a good day at the construction site or a good hospitalization, and we investigate as we would otherwise, we also see errors and mistakes and violations and things like that on good days too. It's just that there's something else there that prevents it from manifesting into a negative outcome. So error is normal, it's present on good days too. Blame fixes nothing for somebody who didn't intend to do something. It creates resentment in those concealment cultures. It doesn't change the system at all. It's as if saying the only problem in our complex systems of work was that worker. And we don't even really see it as being at that point in time. We just take it out on the worker. Learning and improving, 1990, 2000, is it 30 years since 1990? Yeah. And Peter Senge wrote the book 30 years ago about being a learning organization. It takes a long time for that to land for safety, but it really has. And that's what we're really doing here. 4, context drives behavior. That's that bounded rationale. Carl Weick says bounded rationality, or others say local rationality. And that is that people do things that make sense to them at the time. People just don't inherently do things that do not make sense to them. There may not be common sense anymore, go old guys like me, but there is sense making. We all make sense of things in our own way. And so the new trick is to understand sense making. And that's the work of Carl Weick and high reliability organizing and those sorts of things. And then finally, how we respond matters. It's Blotto, TM, the blame learning organization trade-off. One more thing on the background of this is that some kind of just culture matrix is really useful here, I find. We will use learning teams for really good and really exemplary work to learn more about it. We will convene a learning team about just normal work if we don't think we have a full grasp of it, and then anything that's not quite as it could have been. But a simple mechanism like this, and I've seen organizations with far more complex, they call them just and fair methodologies, and really in 2020, boiling that down to simpler terms, maybe not this simple, but pretty simple. So when something's good, we just ask, is it transactional or transformational? I've heard that also. What are the terms they used? Expected or exemplary? Is it something that could be reasonably be expected or something exemplary? And then when something could be better, we have to ask ourselves if this was an intentional or an unintentional act. Even if it was an intentional act, surely the outcome was not intended. Sometimes. So this really has us looking at those unintentional things. This is what we're talking about, where for unintentional acts that blame is actually a hindrance and drives us backwards. Errors and mistakes, blaming for errors and mistakes takes us nowhere. And even when it's an intentional act, a non-compliance, maybe this is violation, reason would call this a violation. You know, if it's a system induced or a system pressured violation, it's difficult for us to use deterrence theory then, because for that deterrence theory from criminology of enforcement to be a deterrent that we think it is, the consequence has to be levied every time the violation is made. And the simple fact is we have enough of a surveillance state. One of the terminal operations put up cameras all around the terminal, and they called them safety cameras to watch everybody work. So we can have heavy duty surveillance states, but unless we are triggering the consequences of that violation every time it happens, we start to lose traction with deterrence theory from penology and this notion that broken windows policing and all that stuff, that punishing the small stuff will take care of the big stuff. So on a graph like this, we save blame for those intentional, malicious. It's a smaller percentage of instances than you might think. But I always recommend organizations start with this and just start in the middle and move back this way, move to the right, avoiding retribution incrementally until you're comfortable.
Hey, Jeff, it's Alistair.
Hey.
When we had that session a couple of weeks back, I touched on just culture and asked for a bit of feedback from you. One of the things I would say is that, because I have used it where I used to work overseas, and there was more than one occasion where somebody was about to be punished, and using just culture was able to prove that the individual wasn't at fault. It was a systemic issue that caused them to do what they did or not do what took place. So I found some good value in it.
How great, because I've also heard stories of just culture being done to people. So just like Scott's point, or the Safe Start, hey Dave, just like Safe Start or some of those other terms, it can all get weaponized. Blame, and there was something in your story there that was really intriguing, is that blame is so pervasive that people are involved. People will blame themselves. I mean, we're already, I think, blame heavy in our safety worldview. And then when somebody does something and they come out and they go, I totally screwed up. Well, you're just, yeah, you feel bad, and that's a human thing to say, but you're right. This kind of analysis can actually be used to go back and say, it was just a mistake. I mean, how many times, when somebody does something else, we say, that's okay. It's just a mistake. That's okay. We'll clean it up. It's just a glass. Don't worry about it. It's fine. We say that in some parts of our lives, just not at work. Right? So I really think we have to look at culpability differently. And but yeah, people will blame themselves, and we can help come back and alleviate some of that burden and say, look, you were just responding to, you were too few resources, too little time. We didn't explain it all enough. There was lots of stuff there. Give yourself a break. So to hear just culture, a just culture methodology be used to alleviate somebody's guilt, I think is a beautiful little nugget right there. That's awesome. But that's the 1% of the time. The other 99% of the time, I'm afraid it gets used to beat people up. So cool. Anything else? Because the next thing I got is a video, but it's short. Going once.
Okay. I'll say something. It's Natalia. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I just love this so much. And it's something that, I've been able to incorporate into my professional practice over the last, 2 years, maybe. And what Alistair says resonates with me too. And what you're saying about how you can kind of alleviate, the blame or the shame that a person feels naturally by having that type of dialogue when you're doing a learning review after some could have been better outcome. It's huge. Yeah.
So
it also makes me angry a little bit. Sometimes I get frustrated because I feel like I spent the first, 5+ years of my career operating in that blamey space. And it's hard for me every time it comes up because I think back to that and I get frustrated. I can't believe it. I used to work in oil and gas in Northern Alberta, and that was like, that was all we did.
So I know you, so I can say this, but this is a 5 years of doing that violin. And I gotta say, lady, my violin, I got a 20-year violin of being that way. So
yeah.
But yeah, no, it opens up a different conversation right away.
Totally.
What I was going to say was about second victims, and another related aspect to that is that we used to worry about, well, we still should, but we used to worry more about power line guys and tower crane guys and stuff like that. And those guys effectively manage risk for the most part. And the worry now is not so much in operations like that; it's more on the warehouse forklift. or driving the truck out of the bay and across the yard where people's guard is down and their attention to risk is down, and there's no controls. What are our controls in a warehouse? Stay in the painted line and peek around a corner and, you know, don't walk in front of the forklift kind of thing. So critical risk with pretty dodgy controls. And so there's actually a safety video that unpacks an incident where a front end loader backs over somebody, and then they animate it, and then they go on with bullet points, and it's like, well, the dead person shouldn't have been there and should have been paying more attention, and blah 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 blah, and the driver should have looked at where he was going and shoulder checked and this and this and this. I mean, all true maybe, but all they're really doing in that accident video is crapping on the dead person, and blaming this guy who probably has had the second worst day ever. And those guys involved in machinery operation often never return to work. I mean, it's devastating psychologically to be involved in a serious or fatal accident if you're at the controls. And historically, we might have come in and thrown that person in a room and given him a witness statement and done kind of the quasi-criminal investigation-y kind of thing, and just re-victimized him. So I wonder, when if there was no malice, if there was no intent, unless we know he sped up or aimed at the guy, why do we take this quasi-criminal approach? He's the second victim. He's devastated, probably. He's just killed his buddy. So anyway, I know that's not what you said, but it's what you made me think, Nat. So.
I got a question for you, Jeffrey.
Yes, sir.
I guess we're always trying to hand out, I don't know if that's the right word, but trying to hand out like fair and equitable sort of discipline when it comes to incidents. And to me, it looks like we need to take a step back and team up with HR and really kind of come to terms with this and redevelop our disciplinary action program, if anything, because lots of times we're sort of pigeonholed into an action based on what that plan says what we ought to do, right? So what have you done? Like, does that make sense? Or have you ever worked with restructuring, not necessarily restructuring our health and safety program, but restructure what we say we're going to do when there's an incident?
Well said, ladies and gentlemen. Gerard Hunter nailed it. That's precisely what we do, and that's the point I'm trying to get at. Is that to make forward progress. I'm not saying that all organizations have to change necessarily, but all organizations have to take a deep, hard look at deterrence theory and the effectiveness of deterrence theory and intentional acts and unintentional acts and system factors. Googling these guys, Brueggen and Cools, and they've got a lot of stuff posted on a website called Skybrary. It's like library for skies. Planes. Anyway, they do it. That's where this is from. They do a ton of work there. But yeah, we've been heavy-handed in safety. I think we've been other aspects of business. In fact, that's one of the points I want to get to about learning teams, is that there's been other facets of business that have evolved, I think, more contemporarily than safety has. And safety has been taboo and sacrosanct, and nobody messes with it. Everybody's afraid. Everybody's afraid. Organizations are afraid. You know, there's this fear coming down from 100 years of regulatory enforcement that gets internalized to organizations. And we need to be really mindful that we'll stand together as an organization and take our lumps, because this is our people and our culture and our work, and it is what it is. But organizations that just say, well, if the board craps on me and that's how safety works, I'm going to internalize it. In fact, I've got that sawmill excerpt from 1925. And in the Barnett sawmill in Burnaby, they said, workers that have been in 3 medical aids a year will be fired unless they can furnish positive proof that it wasn't their fault or it was unavoidable. And that's the strict liability offense. That's what duty holders under the law are subjected to, is that strict liability offense. But you know what we're really doing is we're holding workers to that strict liability mindset, and it's not really appropriate in complex organizations, I think. So try this on for size. Oddly enough, with this technology, I can't hear the audio of this on my end. So when the video starts, if y'all somebody give me a thumbs up to say they can hear it, that would be great. Oh, can you see that? Can you see that awesome error message that I can see? Let's try this again.
We run 5 geothermal power stations. We generate enough power here for about 400,000 domestic customers. Safety is a very, very important part of our operations here at Contact. We've come to realise that the real goldmine of information is in the people that work at the workface every day, and we've been putting a lot of work into trying to get more and more of their help in improving safety.
Previously, you sort of treated like a bit like a criminal, where something goes wrong, you're almost isolated, and then you get this big director from up high coming down and running an investigation, and whatever goes on behind the scenes is kind of pieced together, and then suddenly you get told in another directive what to do and do it safely this time.
You sort of got left out of the investigation as to what happened. You just got asked questions and work was stopped.
I think what we've really achieved over the last 2 years with getting learning teams within Contact Energy is to help people to think about how can they make their work safer and creating that environment for them to be able to do that.
The new way is more of a learning team environment. Everyone gets pulled in that was involved with the incident. Everyone goes over it together. It's more of a group discussion than just a one person getting reamed and taking all the blame for something.
You have identified an issue on site that is not safe, and now within a very short time space you have an opportunity to actually solve it with all the input from all the people and come up with a really workable solution.
Since we've been running learning teams, people are a lot more willing to come forward and raise issues with us and be involved and engaged in our health and safety program.
Yeah, they feel like the whole process is more of value.
Since we've been doing learning groups, people want to get involved. They want to ensure that everyone gets home safely and everyone's got each other's back.
After a few of the learning meetings we've had, everyone is aware that they're responsible for their own health and safety, as we are, but everyone gets a lot more involved in our toolboxes, our hazard IDs. Everyone's got an input. Everyone wants to know what's going on, and everyone's happy to ask questions, or if they don't feel safe, they speak up now because they know that they're definitely going to get listened to.
What I've found with learning teams is that after 40 minutes, 50 minutes, people really start to get right down under a few more layers and start to get into the real root of the problems, and you're able to work on things that before were not very easily discoverable.
Rather than managing safety from the top or from an HS&E perspective, it is from within, and people are really trying to improve the way they work and make their own workplace safer.
Yay, Kiwis. What'd you think? It's all true. That's all I'm going to go on to say. The rest of the hour is basically what they said. You good?
Well, there was one part that kind of jumped out to me, just around, so like having a group discussion. Like, okay, so I'm just learning these concepts and I'm trying to integrate them as much as I can. And within the organization that I'm in now, like there's definitely an appetite, to approach investigations this way. However, one piece that's hard to get away from is that traditional interview, single person interview sort of style. So like the way that I've been doing it is having a learning team, which is basically like an investigation team. I'm just calling it something different at this stage, like I'm not really doing it. But if we call, it's like it's our learning team, and we the team speak to everybody, but we do it separately. Like I don't know, that's been a really hard sell. Like working on an investigation right now where there were 9 people involved and we did 9 separate interviews, and you lose so much value. I think when you do it that way, I just don't know how to get people to like sell people on this idea that we all should talk about it together instead of in these little silos.
It's not, I don't know really how to articulate this. It's not just a group investigation. It's the reason to all of Todd's work, he's really hunkered down on this, pre-accident investigation and pre-accident podcast, is the play on words that nobody ever says, God, I'll bet you none of those people said, God, that was a great investigation, Nat. Can you investigate me again for something? Like the nature of this term investigation and Todd's play on words is, why would we investigate a day with nothing bad happening in it? And so when we get into this, I mean, I've got some slides for that.
Okay.
I think. But yeah, I don't think you can half measure it. That was kind of my first caution, is that unless you have made sufficient declarations that this is a different process, that discipline's off the table, that we're going to follow this thing as a pilot.
That's part of it. That is said, you know.
Okay.
That is, we make that commitment in the beginning and we voice it.
Okay.
Leadership makes that commitment. That's communicated to everybody.
Okay.
But it just feels, I don't know. Maybe I don't exactly know what I'm trying to say. It just feels really kind of old school, and like that sort of traditional, like shine the light in your eyes and slap the table. You know, we've got you alone in this room and there's 4 of us and 1 of you, you know?
Yeah.
No, even though you're saying different things, it still feels that way. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know.
One important principle around learning teams, and I don't know if I've got a bullet on it, is that so there's big concerns about liability then coming out of Australia, where they've got industrial manslaughter in the criminal code, and they've got all these charges, and it's very litigious. And there's a real concern around that in the privilege, things that fall under the blanket of privilege there, and it stops companies from sharing within industry about the details of the case. And so there was some question about learning teams relative to that. All those things apply to investigation. And if it's a critical matter and the authorities are as involved in that, then let an investigation be an investigation, I suppose. But what we might do in parallel, a learning team wouldn't convene about the incident so much as it would convene about that piece of work. So warehouse, loading dock operations, right? And when you look at it that way, whether or not you invited people that were directly involved. I mean, we have done them where we've invited the injured person back to participate, and other times we really don't need to, because our focus is the context of work around. So we're not investigating the incident as much as the context of work in which the incident took place. And from simply looking at that, we can reverse engineer it. And honestly, it's really good.
I've got a question, Jeff. Scott here. Sorry, on that, unless you wanted to add, I didn't want to cut you off. Okay. So, I mean, we've all done various versions of investigations, short ones, quick ones, long ones, serious ones, and whatnot. One of the things that I've always found, this is all new to me, by the way, learning teams. I honestly thought I was here to learn about Microsoft Teams. So
I got that from their first comment. Yeah.
So this is much more interesting than what I thought I was coming for.
Oh, I don't know. Microsoft Teams is pretty amazing.
But so the concept of learning teams, I think, is awesome. Again, it kind of, I see value in it, but I also see where and I guess maybe this is a part of the equation that I just haven't heard, but when you do have that chance to sit down with somebody one-on-one, where you do have engagement, you do have trust, I find a lot of times they are willing to open up to you, and they'll just tell you, how things were. I just wonder about the dynamic of them doing that in a group. If they were involved in the incident, if there's a degree of responsibility, accountability, ownership on their part, how likely are they to open up in front of a group?
Wow. Bunch of words there, accountability and ownership and all that stuff there. And again, too, we're anchoring this back. I think the best conversation we can have about learning teams as a means of learning. The degree to which that's used in an investigative way is another conversation. But yeah, it's totally normal that we're coming off our whole careers and 100 years worth of investigating. So I'm just getting the thin edge of the Teflon wedge in there and just trying to creak those apart, that there's a difference between learning and investigating.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is the openness and the transparency, is that there in the learning team, the way that it is when you sit down somebody one-on-one with compassion, understanding, and you have that engagement.
Yeah, following the process, I think there's more trust and there's more openness and honesty, because your example there really depends. It's about you being in the room and how you speak to holistic wellness and all these other factors, and how you come across as non-judgy. But how pervasively can we put that emotional intelligence out through our organizations? We would have tried. So here's a mechanism that's an organized learning structure. Well, why don't we walk through it? These are all really good questions, guys, and I did ask for them. But I realized that if I just run through a learning team from beginning to end, it might fill in a lot of, and then I know you'll come back to me with even
Just one thought there that you're probably going to touch on is that cultural bias is going to be a factor either way. The safety culture of the organization will influence it positively or negatively.
Okay, define safety culture.
Yeah, okay. Let's get on to the slides. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a good mic drop. So this is the work of Bob Edwards. Now there is a book, Brent Sutton's book, we're going to talk about in a minute. But Bob Edwards from GE does a lot of work with Andrea Baker. She was GE Aerospace and he was GE Dishwashers, but they got together in General Electric and really did a lot to pioneer this. So Bob and Andrea, or Bob and Andrea have a book coming out just in time for Christmas, maybe, about learning teams. But we'll talk about Brent's in a bit. So this is really the work of Bob Edwards. And this is how he depicts the model. We do a first session, couple of hours. We always build in a break. We always build in at least a day, or at least an overnight, or I guess at least a lunch if you absolutely had to, but certainly an overnight at a minimum, sometimes two, but not much more than that. And we go back and we reconvene. And this I just call the learning loop, that we stay in this learning loop. So some of the examples, or a particular example, if we have time, we'll play Jenga on it. But this organization was on this journey, and they suffered it's a manufacturing setting, and they suffered their first lost time incident in 14 years. A worker was cleaning gunk off a roller, and somebody else pressed a button. They were past the lockout barriers. Somebody else pressed a button, sucked his hand between the rollers, and took some skin off. He's still on light duties a year later, but so it was a significant, but it was no fractures. That wasn't a crush. In that, where the organization comes out, they did actually 3 loops around. It took the entire first session talking about what we were doing to give them the confidence that they had the trust to participate in the process. So it took, there was an extra time around the horn at the end because the whole first session was spilt. This is a company that is, as recently as a few months previously, just fires people for anything even remotely similar. So it really took a lot of trust building. Anyway, so we go the learning, soak time learning at least twice, sometimes 3, but that's typically due to a lack of trust initially, or there's so much to learn, you just need one more session to unpack it all. Now, what's interesting is that people stay in the learning loop until we've gained sufficient understanding of the context and of the work in which the accident happened. And it's only when we feel sufficient understanding is gained about the whole messy context of the work that we even set out to define our problem statements. And here's another place where it departs quite a lot from a lot of accident investigation methodologies, is that they almost have you defining your problem statements up front or early on when you really don't have enough information at the table. So one of the key concepts, stay in learning mode. We'll walk through the 2 meeting structure here in a bit, but we don't define our problem statements until we feel we've gained sufficient understanding of the context of the work. And it's only then, once we define those problem statements, then the learning team sessions go into kind of a solution brainstorm to some degree based on the data that's already been unearthed. All outcomes or recommendations from a learning team are grouped in what we call 1-star, 2-star, 3-star. So 1-star is somebody just changes a bit of the process, or changes a sign, or goes to Home Hardware and fabs something up that can be it's tri-storming really. So low-hanging fruit, a recommendation of the group that's easily done and easily acted upon. 2-star items, time and money. A little more time, a little more money, a little more resource. So maybe it's a maintenance electrician has to get a magic eye, like a photo cell eye, and get that procured and get that attached, or something like that. And then 3-star items might involve, significant changes or moving things around or something. We rate all, we look for all though. We don't just look for the easy, quick fruit. We identify through the method 1-star, 2-star, 3-star. The trick there is that we pull the trigger on all of them at once. And what the workforce sees is obviously the immediate low-hanging fruit, trip to the hardware store stuff. But what's important that we communicate is that the ball gets rolling on the others at the same time. So it's not just what do we do first, we wait till that's done. We pull the trigger on all of them at once. In this case, there was going to be capital expenditure for covered storage outside of the factory, and that was going to be a major investment and take a while. But it had been talked about, but this made that important, and the wheels got turned in motion to have that designed and have that costed. So it's an example, and they honestly did go to the hardware store and try different brushes and different cleaning supplies. So that was their 1-star. It really was a maintenance electrician installing a magic eye that was the 2-star, or one of the 2 stars. And the 3-star was a new structure on the property to cover outside storage so that outside storage stayed dry. That's an example of 1-star, 2-star, 3-star. And we try-storm these things, and then sharing the story is a huge part of the process, is that the extra session that was spent building trust in this test example case was really still worthwhile, because when the learning team story was told across the organization, it had a lot of collateral benefit that we'll talk about. So that's it. I mean, it's deceptively simple, but that is really the learning team model. It's learning, a learning session, soap time, learning session, gain understanding, define problems, solve problems. So key points, we have to take discipline off the table. This client was bold in saying it was their first LTI in 14 years. Everybody else who did something similar would have been fired, but they said, well, this is the time. You know, there's more here to be learned. There's more here to be gained from learning than there is through punishment. And they had the courage and the commitment to have their first go of it. And so a senior leader attends, and their job is just to introduce the session and give everybody in the room assurances that discipline's off the table. And, you know, it's just like counseling, though, unless somebody confesses a crime or the intent to commit a crime or something, then we call a time and the learning team stops, and we've got real malicious culpability there. It's all bets are off at that point, but it doesn't happen. We've got to suspend judgment. We've got to be incredibly curious about the context. Normally at this point in the journey, organizations have had some snippets of blue line learning. So we've maybe at this point in the journey, for 1 month, we've had the organization change either their DuPont stop or their behavior-based work observations, where managers come out, they all hurry out of their offices the last week of the month to go and watch work and then tell somebody they did something good, not so good, and something good, or whatever it is to get the KPI so they get their yearly bonus. Those managerial work observations, we change those right away to not be managerial judgment for compliance, but in fact, managers are tasked with going out and learning something from the shop floor that was different than they thought it was, or something they didn't know. And that becomes the KPI, not just the act of going out and filling out a form. So we've planted some seeds to whet everybody's appetite and make them incredibly curious about these rich contexts, because typically at this point, there's already some evidence there that there's the reality we think we know, there's the work we imagine, and then there's the work as it's actually done. So get them curious about context. And one other thing too is that this is a data-driven process, not a process for driving data collection. So it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference on what happens. Okay, so Brent Sutton's, now Bob's book is coming out just in time for Christmas, I guess. This is Brent Sutton's recent book, The Practice of Learning Teams. He has a big online community. He's got facilitator competency profiles. He's done a lot of work to bring structure and rigor to this learning team idea. His 5 principles are that understanding work as imagined versus work as done, gives us the context we really need. That's black line, blue line. Understanding that there is a black line, and understanding and having some evidence that there is a blue line, and understanding that the blue line is kept from us for the most part. And so really understanding black line, blue line, and red line gives us the context we're looking for. Also, one of Sutton's principles is that related groups are better at problem identification and solution than any individual. So problem identification and solutions that come out of a group setting like that are consistently better than that of an individual, and that workers have the best knowledge and understanding of the work itself, regardless of position or how important anybody in the organization thinks they are. Those guys out on the shop floor that actually push the buttons and do the things know a hell of a lot more than we do about pushing the buttons and doing the things. And then finally, it's that putting effort into the understanding the problem before jumping to solution. So I was actually just on a workshop with Conklin earlier today, and he he says that, you know, Einstein, we always attribute Einstein all these quotes, and Einstein probably didn't say any of those things, but the fictitious Einstein quote in question was, you know, if you had an hour to solve the world's biggest problem, and he said, I'd spend 55 minutes, you know, defining the problem. And quite often we just jump, we think we know, and we suppose the problem statement, or we suppose the problem, and we fix the wrong thing. We're really good at fixing things. This is an exercise in learning the right things to fix more than ever before. So those are his principles out of the book. They're great. It's a great book, and he's got lots of great online resources. So once you've had that kind of philosophical move to get to this point, choose the topic. Now, I didn't recommend that my client do this on the first LTI this plant had had in 14 years, in an environment where other plants had been firing people for less. It was a very bold move, but they did. You can start with a near miss or a no loss event. You can start with an irregular day. You can start with a successful piece of work. It all comes down to the sensitivities of that trust building. So if trust is really an issue in that organization, then starting by analyzing a successful piece of work and following this exact same methodology, sharing the story at the end, sends a message that says, oh, maybe they're real about this and they want to learn. And then you can move towards more high consequence events. So choose the topic that you're going to unpack, or the type of work. Your facilitators. So we need facilitator support. So Bob and Andrea do a terrific 8-hour session. I don't know that you could facilitate. Maybe some people could facilitate just from Brent's book. Some people run with it right after Bob's sessions. Still other people think that Bob's session is a bit broad and philosophical and not enough do this, then do this, then do this points. But choosing the right facilitators is critically important for trust, for understanding and commitment to the process, and that they don't come in with baggage or bias or have too much position that's too close to the matter. And a scribe. So we always say lead facilitator, backup facilitator, and then sometimes a scribe, sometimes the backup facilitator is the scribe. But we really want to focus on, there it is, thanks Keith. Really want to focus on the facilitator needs to focus on what's being said, listen intently to the whole conversation and stick to the principles in the process. And so the scribe can be scribbling post-it notes and things like that. But definitely, and the other thing about a lead facilitator, co-facilitator, is that that's really how you learn. That's really how you grow more facilitators in your organization, is by letting them come in as co-pilot and advance as they want to. And the other thing too, I think maybe I just said this, is that after we come out of the fundamentals workshops, the people that really gravitate to this and become excellent at this might not be the people you might have earmarked if we were sitting in a meeting room saying, oh, who in the organization should we get to be a facilitator? Well, when you do fundamentals, you can tell by the responses and the uptake who is your best facilitator. And in one case, it was the junior HR person, not, but she just happened to have this amazing capacity for this and was incredibly successful, but she might not have been the one who got the tap on the shoulder, otherwise. And then finally, participants. So people around the work. It's not necessarily people involved in an incident, although it can be. In the case of the finger pinch, we had both the injured worker and the junior assistant he was working with come and participate in it. But it need not be. And then there was others that had been on that line, and other people with different views of that piece of work, that assembly line they were on. 5 to 7 participants, maybe 2 meetings, 2 hours long, like that. So the learn, soak, learn piece, to delve into that. So first meeting is convened. And then resulting in understanding gaining. So the first session, there's an introductory kickoff. Somebody in a position of power says discipline's off the table, except for the rare exception. And we're really spent building trust, talking about what we know and why we're doing this, and talking about black line, blue line, and really ensuring that trust is built. Staying in learning mode. Now, humans are natural fixers and problem solvers, and then everybody knows we're here talking about something to get better. And one of the facilitator tricks in the first session is don't let people go to solution. It's amazing. And people will word their solutions in the form of a question or some shit like that. But and we're just problem solvers and we will try to do it. The facilitator needs to keep the entire first meeting in learning mode and resist the temptation to go to solution. And one of the key indicators, we've seen this a number of times, you know you're at a good point in that first meeting when somebody from the shop floor will say, all right, you want to know how it is out there? Do you want to just really get real here and talk about how it is out there? That question. Yes, we do. And getting to that point is a real milestone. It happens more than you'd think. Quite incredible. Soak time, sleeping on it. It gives an opportunity to, we all have thoughts when we're supposed to be sleeping or showering in the morning or driving or whatever. So go drive and shower and sleep and do all those things and let that part of your brain work. It gives us a chance maybe to go on a field trip and go look at something on that soak time. There might be a specialized piece of information or further information we want to request and bring into the room. And there might be an attendee. So maintenance, we're pretty good about having maintenance in the room in the first place because they always want to be there, first of all, because they're the shitty end of the stick. Everything gets blamed on maintenance at some point. So they want to be there right from the beginning to end. But we could bring in maintenance. We could bring in IT, if it's an IT, if there's some IT connection, who knows? But that's the benefit of soak time, is that digestion, looking at the work or getting a piece of info or getting extra expertise in the room for the next meeting. Very important. When we reconvene for the second meeting, it's really about reviewing the first. We will have what's called a wall of discovery at that point, literally on the wall, a wall covered in Post-its. And so we stay in learning mode and review that learning until we believe we have sufficient understanding to move forward, and then define the problem statements. And all this is probably in the first half of the second session as a rule. We know we've gained understanding. That's Carl Weick's work on local rationality or bounded rationality. When we've learned enough in the first session about how that is all the time, not just on the accident day, but any time, when we've learned so much from the people about the work that their actions start to make sense. That we as people outside the work can say, wow, knowing what I know now and hearing this rich story about it, it kind of makes sense. It didn't make sense at first why somebody would do that. Now it does. I can understand why somebody would do that. I always say it's as simple as saying, what was that guy thinking? To saying, I really do wonder what that guy was thinking, because if he thought it, other workers might think it. And this is saying, now I know what that guy was thinking. Simple, but it's really effective. Oops. So we define our problems. We go through these. We talked about these already, going through this model, but sharing the story is the final and really important thing. When we've built the trust, we've had the learnings, we come back out, whether it's in the newsletter or a workplace, like internal Facebook-y thing or whatever it is, we tell the story as broadly as we can. A lot of organizations make video clips, well, like the Contact Energy one we just saw. That's more about learning teams themselves. Sharing the story in the organization socializes it, and people go, wow, so this organization's on this new thing where they want to learn, and it looks like they carried it through in the first case, and now they're telling us the story. They learned a whole lot. They're going to improve some cool stuff. It's so important to share that story across the organization. It makes your next one a lot easier and better. So this is nothing new. None of the new views of safety are new. They're just might be new to safety, but they're not new. This now from the Design Council of the UK, the Industrial Design Council of the UK that Winston Churchill started in the 1944, they refer to double diamond learning. This is their industrial design methodology currently. It's about discovering, defining, developing, delivering. And really, we're doing the same thing here. In fact, the client that had this experience, they do something very similar to this, but it's in their manufacturing excellence program. It's in their process improvement, or it's in their innovation program. It wasn't in their safety program, this style of learning. So this is really an effort to diverge and create choices, and then converge, and then make choices out of what you have available. Diverge again for solution, and converge on making those solutions. So here's the video is pretty neat. It worked the second time. Check out this PowerPoint animation. Look at my Post-it notes. This is the wall of discovery. I got bored, so they all come in at once there at the end. This is the wall of discovery. No shit, it's a glass wall of a conference room and it's covered in Post-its. And the scribe is putting them up there and we're just identifying all these relevant nuggets to the work and influences. It's those influencing factors. The second phase, when we get back together then and review that learning, the learnings naturally group themselves into clusters. What we find from all those Post-its is that themes emerge, but this is what when we say it's a data-driven process, it's really a data-driven process. It's unfettered learning and inquiry to generate all the Post-it notes at the outset. Second session, they kind of naturally group themselves. And then still in the second session, once we have that grouped, we go back into creating choices again, and we start to line up potential actions around those clusters of influences. How can we positively influence the influences that were present at the time? And then finally, we conclude on 1, 2, and 3-star solutions and port that out. Deceptively simple. So simple, in fact, that companies bring people in from America and spend a couple of days talking about it. And then they go, is that all? Like, you're not going to give me a document to fill out or a real detailed step-by-step? And we do. We can. So there's more of a sort of a play-by-play. There's a lot in Brent's book and in Bob's upcoming book, and then that's what I get to do, following behind Conklin and Bob Edwards, is really coach people and coach facilitators and get them into doing this.
If I can just share something, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I did something similar to this. Maybe it wasn't a learning team per se in the context of investigating something, but for our safety committees every year, we're tasked with creating an action plan of goals we want to get done. And so I brought 5 people together from different, levels of job title and different areas within the company, different divisions. And I took the past 12 months of all the safety committee meeting minutes, and I scanned them all and I looked at the issues that were coming up. And I threw them on a bunch of large Post-it notes, and I brought all these people together in the room, and I looked at other things like, the NCRs, I know. But anything that came up that was kind of an issue that was identified in the company, I threw it all up on the wall and I said, we're going to look at everything that's transpired, everything that we've talked about over the past year, and we're going to talk about what we want to work on. But this is what I found. And so we did the discovery process where they learned about all of the things that came up, like they were refreshed and going, oh yeah. And we talked about SMART goals and said, we're going to make some choices about what we want to do about all of this information and what would be most impactful to you guys, what's most important to you guys. Let's talk about it. So we ended the meeting, we came back the next week, and they'd had enough time to kind of think about it, and they came to the table with some really good ideas. They all kind of gained consensus pretty quickly on what needed to be done, so that told me something. And then, yeah, we made this action plan afterwards, and there was some really good feedback. It kind of spread like wildfire a little bit, and people saying, oh, yeah, that we've been asking for this for a long time, or, we don't talk about that, but yeah, totally, that's what we're really happy with this. So yeah, that's kind of a, not in a sense of something happening, not investigating a situation, but it was kind of that brainstorming learning team idea.
Absolutely. And so we do, it's just bringing this into safety really, or under the safety umbrella, I think. We know about, other forms of learning, and we do it I think for other projects or for other purposes, but yeah.
Anyway, so I just wanted to share a way I was doing it to give an example of.
You're deferring. So the Carl Weick's mindfulness, one of the 5 tenets of mindfulness was deference to expertise. I mean, getting people into the room and deferring to their expertise as being people that are immersed in the system. They're experts in the system, and seeking their collective insights on a pile of data like that. I mean, I guess the alternative would be you as a manager sitting there saying, well, I'm going to read all these reports and decide what's important, right? So having that inclusive environment, yeah, it's a lot like that.
So Jeff, just a quick question. Can I ask a question? Have you seen this used in outside of I'm going to say outside of industry per se, but say in an incident in an ER in healthcare or something along that line? Have you ever seen it used in?
You talked about healthcare the last time we did one of these calls, and I threatened to put you in touch with some folks that are really championing this.
I was just curious if because I've not seen it done per se, but
there's a lot of new view integration in healthcare, and I would be shocked if this wasn't a part of it. I know the BCNU in Vancouver is aware of it and starting to look at it, but I would have to defer to. The medical stuff in the new view safety space is first of all heavily patient safety driven, and it's really quite its own specialty that I don't delve deeply into, confessing that I don't delve deeply into the learning team or the new view safety stuff that comes out of healthcare much. I just kind of hit the tops of the waves. But I believe it has been and will be, and can definitely put you in touch.
Okay.
Yeah. So having an experience with this operational learning, what it does is it really changes our daily huddle. So most industrial organizations are having a huddle before a shift begins. Not nearly as many have a huddle after, and bookending the shift before you start again the next day is critically important. And just by setting that up, we create a little daily learning loop, by asking different questions of the crew. What happened like we thought it would happen today? What was unexpected today? Where did we get by today? And then turn that into fodder for the next morning's meeting. Okay, what did we learn yesterday? What are we expecting? What are we going into? So we created a daily learning loop. Work observations I talked about, that's the managers that come out and normally used to come out and get their KPI for whatever, different now. They get the KPI check mark for the month if they come back with a piece of information that's new and novel to management. And so that means they've got to go out and build trust, and they've got to go out and really seek to learn about the blue line. That's a huge value add. Weekly meetings change. Developing procedures, to Candace's example, is that, to what degree do we really facilitate the creation of excellent work procedures, but facilitate it coming from those that do the work? I think organizations run the range from some organizations just let the safety manager do it, and others are maybe close to getting a lot of involvement. It changes this sort of learning and improvement, standing away from blame and judgment really does change joint committee function, because joint committees it's a committee that is two sides of the table, and all of the specification on it are to deal with contentiousness and what happens if there's dispute and no dispute resolution. It's set up to be a war room. It's been very difficult. Some are very cooperative and excellent committees out there, but until you sort of turn this corner in safety, you don't really open up the whole new playing field of cooperation and being generative. It's very difficult for committees they can be non-combative at best, but the degree to which they can be generative up until they, delve into this a little bit is yet to be seen. So can we try this? Can we try playing Jenga? Can you see my Jenga? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So stack of Jenga. It's the modern equivalent of domino theory. Better than domino, maybe. So in this case, in this manufacturing facility in the States, first LTI. So what we found coming out of the learning team was a bunch of things. We're careful to make sure that I want to use examples of things that were present, not counterfactuals. So I'm not going to pull a Jenga block and say worker didn't follow procedure. It's things that were actually present. So I might say, where would we start? So there have been really great staffing difficulties in the region. And so just regionally, the worker pool was very shallow, dodgy circumstance, and they were really struggling to find people. And so that's their first challenge. The next, I guess kind of related to that, the next challenge was that there was one fairly experienced worker involved who got his hand pinched, but his assistant was quite new and green. So there was a sort of a, I don't know, I gotta pick a good one here. We don't put them on top. We're not following the rules. This is not rule following Jenga. This is demonstrating a principle Jenga. So really tough labor pool in that region. brand new guy, temporary worker assisting at the time. Now, what else can we say? We could say that there was lockout gates on either side of this apparatus. The gates were such that workers were allowed to enter that area for specific purposes, and there was a sign on the gate that said what they were allowed to enter for. This task was not on there, but this was an unknown task they were doing, cleaning these rollers, because it was a quality thing. They had to pump out 900 pieces a day, and if they didn't clean the rollers, there was going to be a quality defect, and it was going to be a big problem. Also, this plant, there's another factor. The plant has a 24-hour turnaround time to clients. So when an order comes, ooh, don't look, it's getting ugly. Oop, I'll just take that one. So I actually, yeah, the 24-hour turnaround time, I'm going to leave this one half out for a reason and call that 24-hour turnaround time. Quality defect that was unknown. So they were allowed to go into the interlock for certain things. This was very similar to that, but not specifically that. So there was some vagueness around what was permitted and what was not. And the reason that block was that. The reason I'm leaving the production pressures halfway out is because they were known. One way we're going to look at the Jenga stack is the management view. If I had a big mirror here and I held a mirror up so you could see what this thing looks like looking down on it, looks 100%. The view of this Jenga stack from above is 100%. The view from, where are you looking at it here? That angle, it looks okay. That angle, looks different. It looks different depending on what angle you're looking at it. So what else? So the sign was vague. The procedures were, there was a related procedure, but it was pretty kind of vague-ish in that, or not vague, but it was not very practical. The lockout for this equipment was pretty close, within a few feet, but every time they did it, they would have had to lock it out and start it like 4 or 5 times to get the drum turned. And the button was there, but then the reset meant walking about 100 feet down to the end of the line and having to cross the line to do the reset and then come all the way back. So having to have done that 4 times or 5 times to do this task was seen as burdensome. And then the vagueness of the sign at the gate meant this looks like something we can do. So when the accident first happened and the safety manager responded, he did a quick walk around, but then he took himself out of the system. And in that quick walk around, what he heard was that there was this protective tape that was applied, and it had something to do with this protective tape. And he also heard that it happened a lot of times, and they were doing this process all the time, which didn't turn out to be true, actually. What we did learn was that these were rolls of steel going through a manufacturing process. And there was a few things about these rolls of steel. First of all, it's the Pacific Northwest, and they were stored outside. This makes me nervous. Big rolls of steel stored outside in the rain and the crud. So they were wet, they would get wet, but there was like a grit that would form on them. And they were clean enough, but not really super clean. And then because of all this, there were some products used. They would use wax at the sides of the steel product as it went through the system. And that wax combined with the grit, combined with a little bit of moisture, became an issue. Became an issue at some point. And that was causing these things. And then there was the wax they used on the side, and then there was an oil coating too that they used. And all these things were combining to create this quality defect on the roll. Dudes, I don't even know when to push now because it's all just going to fall apart. So again, we're getting fairly far into it. The management view from on high, that audit, it's still looking pretty good. This piece is sticking out a bit. That's visible from the top. That's production pressures. We know we have those. Everything else, though, was information that really wasn't well known or well understood by the organization. This was the operation every day for ages before the accident. These were conditions that were on board all the time. In fact, one of them had to do with the age of the equipment. So the equipment was quite, is that one going to go? No. The equipment was kind of on the older side. Oh, I don't know. This is not working out, friends. Oh, there we go. The equipment was on the older side, and there was a bit of play in it. So there was a maintenance issue detected that it could have been better maintained. So then the one worker goes in and he is cleaning these, they called them goobers. He was cleaning these goobers off the roll. And the junior buddy on the outside was the one that would just jog it. There was a jog button that wasn't affected by the lockup, and the jog would just move the roll a quarter turn. So that's what they were doing. So how does this, can you see this very well? So how's this pile looking? Because this is every day at work.
Looking kind of holy.
Looking in an unholy kind of way. This is this was every day, guys. This was the work they were doing every day. And this is this was an authoritarian organization for 20 years, and they were fairly well surveilled and audited. And yet still all of this was going on. So what happened was the junior worker said that he was going to do the jogger. He didn't say he pressed it at the wrong time. There wasn't enough trust. But at the end of the day, we learned so much about what caused that production issue that if he pushed it deliberately in air or brushed it, as he said, I just brushed it. I must have brushed it with my wrist. So, you know, we learned a lot. We had enough trust to learn a lot. We didn't have quite enough trust for that guy to say, because we really, the story just is like the magic bullet. It just didn't make sense. But we really didn't need to know. We learned so much that when that junior worker went ahead and pushed that button with his buddy's hand there, they were trying to physically advance the, boom. So, was this the cause? Or if we take some of these Jenga blocks that I pulled, and if we line them up like dominoes, oh, you can't see that. If we line them up like dominoes, is that the cause, right? We use the Jenga model to show that a few things. There's stuff that goes on that we don't always know about, and there's a lot of imperfect stuff going on for our people that are working the blue line all day, every day. And the Jenga model, unlike a simple linear mechanistic domino type model, really is a better model at conveying complexity and how our systems are put together. So when we learn all these things, what we're really doing after a learning team, by learning not just about a causation sequence, but the rich context around the work, is that the stuff we fix is the stuff that puts Jenga blocks back in where they ought to be to shore us up and give us a more you know, structurally sound Jenga stack. Thank you for your patience. That was me playing Jenga. So those were the direct learnings. There's more. There was more direct learnings than that. Collateral benefits. So there was another line in this factory that was being disassembled and shipped down to California. And that it was in the process. The trucks were coming, and it was just going to be unbolted and moved to California and set back up. But it was through the learning team process. The people involved said, you know what? There's some hinky things about that other line too. They mentioned a number of things, and the organization was like, thank you. Like, thank you for that bonus learning. If you didn't share that, we were going to put it on trucks. We would have gone to California and put it back together at the same time and been oblivious to it. There was benefit in other location when the story was told, because the manager went to a factory in Alaska, I think, and said, hey, we had this thing, we learned this stuff. Do you have that problem here? And they're like, oh, no, which like black line is the only line we feel safe talking about. And so he prodded a little further, and then they said, well, actually it does. And he talked about a magic eye solution to sense the end of the roll. And they said, oh, that'd be great. That would save us so much time and make everything better and safer. So we had benefits at another location. And then another piece of collateral benefit was that some workers, the plant manager was not involved in this process. We did it all through the corporate team, but he was fine with it in the end. When we debriefed on this, he said that after a few days or a week after the learning team, a few senior people came into his office and said, hey, this thing, that was pretty interesting. They said, are we going to do this now? Like, do you want to know? They said, we got some stuff we want to talk about. It's not safety related, but it's just performance, quality, production related in the plant. Like, are we going to have these conversations now? And the manager was like, sure, let's have those conversations. It was totally bonus. And then finally, he stood and he told us the story that he got a report weeks, months after, that somebody was doing something just seemed bizarre, standing on a ladder, holding up some piece of sheet metal. And somebody, it was such an egregious act that a worker came and reported it. And the manager's first instinct was to react the way he'd always reacted. And this thing was still fairly in recent memory. So he says, show me. They went out, they looked at it. And then he said, okay. So he himself, who hadn't been part of the process, hadn't been through facilitator training, he convened, they went into the boardroom, he brought 5 or 6 people in, and he kind of basically followed the same principles. He asked the questions and got everybody's, and they learned a lot about it, and they solved a problem in a whole new way. So the collateral benefits were parallel work in another location, creating a culture where the workforce felt better to come into the manager's office and say, hey, can we talk about work in this way? And then finally, he had an opportunity to learn and respond in a different way and solve problems in a different way. When he finished telling that story, he said, look, I've been in industry for 30, 40 years. He'd been in the steel business the last 10, but I think it was maybe paper previously. But he said, you know, in my time as a plant manager, he says, I've had to fire really good people over safety things. I've had to fire people that were friends, and it never felt right. These were good people trying their best, and yet I was expected to do this. And he said, it never felt right. And so he was kind of kept, and we still do that to this day sometimes, is keep the manager involved on the periphery a bit as kind of the test. We need to do right by that manager and improve his operations in the most holistic way possible. And so, yeah, those were the extra benefits. And then I want you guys to just grill me here, but I just wanted to say Heinrich's old 88, 10, and 2, 88, 10 from 1932, is that we've used retribution and that safety is so closely tied to enforceable things that I think we've used blame and discipline and judgment and retribution to really try to manage our 88% people problem. And that's really some of the habits we've fallen into. Now, the US Department of Energy they only rounded this out. They called it 80-20. They didn't really change Heinrich's 1932 numbers, but the US Department of Energy said, we'll say 80-20, human triggered, mechanical triggered. And then they went further, and so this is what's led us, this fixing these broken people is what's led us to all of our safety programs being about centralized control, trying to control everybody's actions to the degree possible and police those actions. US Department of Energy came in and said 70% of the human-caused incidents they use the term operational weakness. We would say error-likely situations or systemic influence over the air. So what that means then is that some percentage of incidents that Heinrich would have said were human error caused are just mistakes and lapses and errors and brain farts and stuff that you can kind of come out and talk about presence and peace of mind and mindfulness techniques. There's some error reduction techniques that can be brought to bear, but it's still a bit like trying to fix the person. We need to be sure that it really was just in this category. And I think we need to do it, as Scott says, from a really caring, holistic wellness place when we go there at all. But what this says is, so 56% of our adverse outcomes now, we have different understanding. We think that they're system-induced error or certainly there was no protections, no capacity between the error and the consequence. That we can say for sure. So this new work by these guys really has us, to me, it's a whole new chapter in the career of health and safety, because understanding things on this level gives us a huge new tactic and tons of adverse effects outcomes that we can look at in a different way. And my final slide, honestly, I shit you not, because there's my finish slide. So my final slide is going back to Hallnagel's bell curve, and that Nat spent 5 years, I spent 20 years in this red box where we see the world from this, what we call safety one, or this conventional prevent the bad outcome safety management kind of box. And things just outside the box, near misses, we're better at now, but we weren't always. There's an average day, here's a really good day. And Eric says, it's not safety one versus safety two. He kind of regrets it, but he used the term safety two to mean a view of safety that encompasses what we currently do in safety one, but sees what we do in orthodox safety relevant to the whole. And when we played Jenga and we learned that thing didn't cause an injury for months and months and months, but the circumstances existed, that all it took was that moment on the button for it to happen. And so we look at the whole. This, I think, is the best telling of what we mean by safety too. We look at the whole. We try to look at normal work too. We can play Jenga from things, oh, the hospital study. Even they investigated hospitalizations that had nothing wrong with them, but they found errors, mistakes, violations, slips, right? So that Jenga stack was up here. It spent 3 months, 4 months up here in good days of work. You know, those guys finished the work that day and they got an attaboy for getting their 900 pieces for months. And yet that unstable pile existed. And it was triggered on one particular day, November 4th, I think it was. Just had the anniversary. So go to hophub.org because there's lots of PowerPoints there by Bob Edwards and Andrea Baker. Brilliant. Go to WorkSafe. I think you did, Keith, on the chat, right? Go to WorkSafe Gov New Zealand and just put learning teams into the search bar. I think you shared the Contact Energy also has a cheat sheet that I think you shared, if that's the thing you shared. And then finally, New Zealand's such a hotbed for this. There's a website called maritimelerningteams.org.New Zealand. And there was a ferry accident and they got an alternative sentencing. And they're doing learning teams for the whole maritime industry sector as an alternative to sentencing, because they're not just learning more about that accident, they're teaching their sector new ways to learn. And so the regulator there said, you know what, we're not gonna ding you this 150 grand or whatever, but you're gonna fund this project. And it's gonna be a learning team based project. So as an alternative to sentencing or an alternative to retribution, there's a big case going on there. And hope to bring something similar here. Whew. Okay. Thank you. That was, but I wanted to leave time for, so now we walked through the learning team process. I know that it's not an absolute step-by-step. There's some more coaching we can do that walks a facilitator through in a really detailed way. But, you know, for the purposes of this call, once an organization has had a sample of different ways of looking at safety, learning teams is not the lever itself. The lever underneath the rock is this new thinking. Learning teams is the elephant who comes and sits on the other end of the lever and really changes things in the organization. It's the first in-house, you know, real evidence organizations, management of organizations get that there's a lot to be learned and that we haven't been learning it, and that we can improve in incredibly important ways, especially if we move proactive. We don't wait for incidents to look at, but we use the learning team model on ordinary work so that we make ordinary work more resilient and robust and consistent. Whew. That's the learning team model. The book is great. There's a lot of resources online. But I'm cautious that people dabble without staying really true to the process and the principles throughout the process, and really work on that discipline first in a meaningful way. It's so insidious that you might think you've created trust and addressed the discipline thing. It's a toughie. So
conceptually, I love the idea. I think it's an evolution of the concept of lean approaches and engagement applied in an incident management perspective. You know,
or
where
not.
you can, but where you can learn from it, you can say, how do we manage this better to prevent this? You know, how do we build that trust, that engagement, you know, that inclusion? And those are all huge from my perspective. Again, the nuances, the technicality, the pieces that are rigidly set up in the structure are there for a reason. And I could see where this would take quite a bit to get your head around, especially if you're coming from a traditional approach, right? Getting your head around why you can't just jump to that, or, you know, so that was good. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciated the opportunity to get my head around it.
Oh yeah, no worries. Going all the way back to whatever it is, slide 5, this foundational stuff is really critical to spend time on this. learning teams typically come along is once we've workshopped on this sufficiently and people get it, they want to see some evidence of it. And that's normally the first learning team, but it's not until really sufficient time is spent on these principles first. Thank you, Scott.
And so can you teach me Microsoft Teams too?
No, I refuse. I think I'll teach you Zoom all day long, but not Teams. Anybody else? Because there's got to be good. I thought for sure you guys.
Yeah, I guess sort of a comment, I guess, more than anything. You know, this would be a really good tool to try and work into your daily, weekly, monthly activities, I guess, as a leading indicator, something you measure. So we're not going to wait for an incident to happen and do an investigation, but let's use learning teams and let's add that to our measurement of activities that we're doing on a regular basis. Like, yeah, you can use it to investigate an incident, but find different ways to use it as a leading tool. Just one tool in your toolbox. You know, you continue to do all these other leading type activities, but
yeah, we do everything we currently do, but we'll do this parallel at first. And I never ask an organization to stop doing anything they feel critically important to do until they come to the realization, oh, we can probably stop doing that now because we don't need it anymore. Design thinking, just Google design thinking, and that's really what this is all about. You said something really important I wanted to seize on right there at the beginning, but it's late and I forgot. The daily learning loops. I mean, I really think the trigger to opening up operational learning, whether it's daily, weekly, or monthly, or incident-based, has got to be going back, and the organization has to be credible to its people when it says, so we're really good at safety, we're pretty good at safety, we've learned some stuff recently. We've learned that a few percentage points on our core audit doesn't mean shit. The research paper just came out a few weeks ago that said recordable incident frequency really doesn't mean, you saw that paper, right? Recordable incident frequency doesn't really mean much. So, you know, when an organization has certain key revelations like that, they can go forth with real credibility and say, we want to learn. No organization got better by knowing less. No organization got safer, or you can't manage the risks you don't know about. So you got to learn.
I have a thought to share, and I'm guilty of dabbling. So thank you for reeling me in and, you know, adding a little cautionary note around that. One thing that I think about is like organizational readiness, you know, and like senior leadership will say, we want to do all these things. We want to approach it this way. We're ready, no blame, forget it, let's go. And then it's really hard to hear all of the stuff, right? Because it comes back to there's no the employee failed. It's essentially we failed, right? And it's going to take time and energy and money a lot of the time to fix it. And if you're constantly feeding your leadership that message, like it's hard, and I see it a little bit where I'm at right now, because you're just kind of hammering them, you know, because it's not about the worker, it's about the resiliency of the system, and the system is not resilient because you guys, us employers didn't put enough into it to make it so we screwed up. It's kind of hard. I see it on their faces, you know. So
each Jenga block makes a senior manager pucker, because each one of those Jenga blocks is a component of the system that wasn't perfect. But by doing everything right, they didn't know. So we're getting into the nuances. Now, the managers involved in this company jokingly said, after we had been through this process, they said, I liked it better in the old days. I would have got a report that said a guy's hand got pinched. We would have fired the junior guy right away. We would have let the senior guy get healed a bit, and then we would have found a way to get him out. We would have done a stand down for safety, where we would have said, hey, this guy hurt his hand. Don't everybody be like him. Don't do it. And we would have gone back to work. He said it was easy. It used to be easy. He says, now we've got 1-star and 2-star and 3-star things to deal with. It's intimidating for a manager who's got their whole careers vested in blame and move on.
Totally.
Yeah, I call those dinosaurs.
Yeah.
They're not extinct yet. They just don't know it.
Yes. And I think, so the way I kind of try and combat that is by, applying just culture to the dinosaur, because like the dinosaur deserves that too, right? Like the dinosaur made the best decisions that they could with the information that they had.
Yeah, the way we do safety is not wrong or broken. Companies aren't wrong. People aren't bad. It's just what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got to evolve because it's got some unintended consequences. And we're more complex now. We're more advanced now. We're ready for another level of sophistication. You've got little business units. You can do pilots in your business units, and then telling the story, becomes a really powerful thing. Telling the story of system improvement and learning. Yeah. Zoom is so hard for me because I can't bite my tongue. I can't leave silence long enough for you to come up with your questions.
So what's that old cliche? He who speaks first loses.
Yeah. Yeah. It was easy after the first. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say I too needed to hear the. You need to change a philosophy before you jump right in, because I think I was trying to do a one-man show there and just started off, and the first investigation I ever did with the company I'm working for right now, which is same as Natalia. Just a minute left. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. The first investigation I did, kind of quasi learning team, and it ended up biting me because I did it within this silo, and I completely lost the trust of all the workers afterwards that I kind of gained in talking to them. And when HR kind of hammered down, we made this really good kind of brainstorm and went interviewed everybody and then brought it back to this team of people and said, here's what I found out. How do you guys think we should approach this? Do you have any more questions? Like, what information more do you want me to bring back? And we came out with this really killer investigation that I think really painted the picture for what was going on in that circumstance, and proof that the worker really wasn't at fault. He just made a really simple mistake trying to get the job done. But that was all great. We had a conversation with the worker. We put in place some actions to fix it. And then HR came down and hammered, and they gave the guy 2 days off without pay. Yeah. And I thought everything that I just worked so hard to create that trust with that person, with the rest of the crew hearing it, just like it got shattered. So I learned pretty quick, like, okay, I need to do something different here as an approach. But that philosophy, with the 5 principles, that set in 5 principles helped. So I just got to figure out how I'm going to do that.
Yeah. But, we always say, do workers make bad choices or do they have bad choices? Do they not have a great selection of choices to choose from? And I think, yeah, I'd love a crack at your HR. You know that. I think you guys are doing the right things, but we'll see.
Yeah, so changing HR, like what was the guy who was, Scott was saying, like systematically there's framework in place, and it's a lot of work to make that happen across the board, get everybody on the same process or thought process, and like we're not a small company. We have large departments, and trying to get those departments on board with what we're doing that's a big job. Like, I don't think I can do that alone.
They're really stuck on outcomes. Safety's so stuck on outcomes. If there's a bad outcome, there's got to be culpability because our systems are perfect, right? So then somebody was culpable to generate that bad outcome. And safety's more than the outcomes. We're really good at preventing bad outcomes. We're pretty good. Safety's in the context of the work. So we can only look at the context of the work when we revisit blame. Hi.
Yeah, so good luck with that, everybody.
Oh, you got headphones on. She can't hear.
Oh, sorry. Here, I'll take it out. Hi to you, Rebecca.
Hi.
This is Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca. Does anybody else have questions for Rebecca while we're still here?
Rebecca, how old are you?
5.
Aha, kindergarten. Exciting.
Well, my brother goes to the same class.
Your brother does?
Oh.
Yeah, to the same school, but not in the same class.
Oh. What grade is he in?
4.
Oh, wow. So he can tell you what to expect.
Yes.
Yeah.
He told me what 1 + 1 is.
He did?
2.
What is it? 2?
Oh.
That's awesome.
Nice.
That's awesome.
That sounds like a good brother.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of brothers might have not said 2.
No.
Well, everybody, thanks. Like I say, happy to provide references and give you the slide deck or better or point you to any resources or anything like that anytime.
Can I ask one more thing before we go?
No.
Well, we got 3 minutes on my clock.
Oh shit. Okay.
You still have a large audience, Jeff.
Yeah.
Careful.
Yeah.
So the fundamental workshop on causation. Want to learn more about that. Curious because causation analysis tools. Oh my gosh, right? Like there are so many, and so many put you, like, I feel like they put you in the safety 1 box. So is that a part of the causation workshop? Are there tools that?
So a lot of investigation tools are, and that's the whole thing about, leading indicators. That's what it was. I couldn't remember Gerard's point, and he alluded to leading indicators.
Mm-hmm.
I did a leading indicators report for electricity.ca early in the pandemic, and I spoke to the lady from ConocoPhillips Canada, and they're very much on this. I spoke to Diane from BP and a guy from One Gas in the States and ConocoPhillips. And ConocoPhillips uses as a leading indicator the number of learning teams they do. And I said, well, don't you have more, indicators around that? Anything particular? Like what if it was, and she says, no, well, their learning team playbook says that they don't stop the learning team until the actions make sense to the people in the room. The people in the room try to learn so much that the worker actions make sense. Then they know they've concluded. And so by that standard of completion, they just count how many times they do it. It's interesting, hey? We could go another hour if it wasn't tonight. But I mean, we're all friends now. Thanks. Let me know. I'll send Keith the slide deck again. And yeah, happy to help or point you in the right direction or anything I can to set you off on your course.
Thanks, Jeff.
Cheers, thanks, guys. Jeff. Big help.
Thank you all.
Well done.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Scott, before you go, how do I get a hold of you?
Is my name there? My name at carbonsafety.ca.
I'm sorry, at which?
Carbon Safety, CARBON. Actually, you know what? Keith emailed me about this. So what if I just send an email to Keith? Would that work?
That'll work.
I've got everybody's email addresses when you're ready.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, and yeah, let me know about formally and finally joining you guys. That'd be,
like I said, cool. I'll reach out to you. We can discuss.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you,
Rebecca.
That'd be great.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Jeff, I sent you a link to, because a lot of the stuff in diagrams and whatnot looks a lot like what my wife's doing in design thinking and innovation labs and whatnot. I mean, it's identical. Yep. I sent you a quick, I keep pilfering her books and looking at what she's been up to and whatnot, because I keep, I pull out the book and all the rest of it. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. Looking over at her design thinking books going, okay, what's going on over here? Why are we, where are we going here?
So these guys, they had, in their manufacturing excellence program, have been using this kind of learning for innovation in other aspects of the business for ages. But they've spent 20 years on the DuPont journey that says this is what you will do. And everything in that is biased towards judgment and consternation. And they just had to make that link that it's okay to learn this way about safety. Or in the safety realm.
It was interesting that, because I've been to the Think Innovation Hub a couple of times in Vancouver and watched them go through a process there with like Post-its everywhere as everybody brainstorms the ideas and comes up with and just their entire process is very similar. So
cool. Thank you for that. I'll look at that.
Yeah, I sent you a link to where they were. My wife did a course there, and a lot of it's very interesting. Their facilitation is all around the innovation and design thinking format.
Yep, that's what it is.
So I keep pilfering my wife's books now.
Yeah, because nobody wants to pilfer safety books, right?
Well, I keep buying them.
Okay, guys. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks very much.
Okay.
Thanks,
you.
Jeff.
Good night.
See ya. Good night.
Okay, good night.